Boundary of justice. Blood trickled between my fingers as I pressed them against the wound in my side. The Arizona sun hammered down, turning the desert into a furnace determined to cook the last breath from my lungs. My canteen lay empty 6 feet away, punctured by the same bullet that had found its way into my flesh. Through squinted eyes, I made out the silhouettes of 3 riders watching from the ridge. Men I recognized as former members of Jake Rattlesnake Stanton's gang, come to extract vengeance for their fallen leader. At 40 years old, I'd seen more death than most, at Gettysburg, at Shiloh, and in countless nameless skirmishes across the frontier. But facing my own end here, alone in this God-forsaken desert, wasn't how Wyatt Hayes was supposed to meet his maker. Every man dies, but not every man chooses how. My fingers tightened around my empty Colt. No bullets left. No chance. Unless the story of how I ended up bleeding into Arizona dust began 2 weeks earlier. The saloon in Redemption smelled of stale whiskey and desperation. A combination I'd grown familiar with in my years tracking men with prices on their heads. The piano player hammered out a tune that might have been popular back east 5 years ago, his fingers striking the yellowed keys with more enthusiasm than skill. I settled at a corner table, back to the wall, whiskey glass in my left hand, while my right stayed free. Old habits die hard, especially the ones that keep a man breathing. Well, I'll be damned, Wyatt Hayes. Sheriff Morrison's voice hadn't changed much since we'd served together in the 7th Cavalry. He was heavier now, with gray creeping into his mustache, but his eyes still held that same sharp intelligence that had kept our unit alive through the worst of the war. Thomas, I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. Didn't expect to find you wearing a badge. He sat heavily, signaling the bartender for a drink. Didn't expect to be wearing one. Life takes strange turns after the war. His eyes narrowed. You still hunting bounties? I took a slow sip of whiskey. Man's got to eat. Morrison leaned forward, voice dropping low. Jake Stanton's gang hit the stagecoach yesterday. 6 dead, including a woman and child. He pushed a wanted poster across the table. $3,000 for Stanton, dead or alive. The familiar face stared up from the weathered paper. We'd served together, Morrison, Stanton, and me, until Stanton sold information to the Confederates that got half our unit killed. He disappeared after that, and the Army had better things to do than hunt one traitor. But I never forgot. Some betrayals cut too deep. There's more, Morrison continued. They took a woman, Apache. Name's Elena. She was traveling as interpreter for an Army lieutenant. The whiskey turned bitter on my tongue. Since when does a stagecoach robber take prisoners? Since never. Morrison's face darkened. I've got no men to spare. The Comanche are raiding ranches north of here, and every able body is headed that way. I studied the amber liquid in my glass, understanding what wasn't being said. An Apache woman wasn't high on the list of priorities for the law in these parts. Where are they holed up? I finally asked. Last seen heading toward Rattlesnake Canyon, 3 days ride west. I nodded, draining my glass. Some hunts were about the money. Others were about settling old debts. I'll leave at first light. The Tennessee Walker beneath me picked its way carefully through the rocky terrain. 3 days of hard riding had brought me to the edge of rattlesnake territory, a maze of canyons and dried creek beds, where a man could hide for years if he knew the land. I'd packed light but prepared. My Colt single-action army with custom ivory grips rode on my hip, each of its 6 chambers loaded with a .45 cartridge I'd inspected personally. The Springfield rifle strapped to my saddle could take a man's head off at 300 yards. A buck knife with an 8-inch blade nestled against my ankle. Survival out here wasn't about how much you carried. It was about knowing how to use what you had. The sun had begun its descent when I spotted it, a lone Joshua tree, its twisted limbs reaching skyward like a condemned man's final plea. From one branch hung the body of a man, slowly turning in the hot breeze. A note had been pinned to his chest. I approached cautiously, hand resting on my Colt. The dead man wore the dusty remains of a suit, a businessman or perhaps a banker. His swollen face was unrecognizable, but the message pinned to him was clear enough. For Hayes, come join the party. So Stanton knew I was coming. The element of surprise was gone, but it didn't matter. This wasn't my first manhunt, and Stanton wasn't the first killer who thought he could outfox me. As the last light bled from the sky, I made camp in a sheltered ravine, building no fire that might give away my position. I checked my weapons methodically, actions I'd performed thousands of times. The familiar ritual calmed my mind, preparing it for what lay ahead. Tomorrow I'd find Stanton, and one way or another, one of us wouldn't be riding away. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the morning silence. Dirt exploded inches from my head as I rolled behind a boulder, drawing my Colt in one fluid motion. Two shooters positioned on the ridgeline to my right. Amateur mistake. The morning sun at their backs cast their silhouettes in sharp relief against the sky. One fired again, the bullet whining off stone near my shoulder. I waited for the second shot, then rose quickly, squeezing off 2 rounds in rapid succession. The first shooter jerked backward, clutching his chest. The second dropped to one knee, trying to make himself a smaller target. Too late. My third shot caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him around. He tumbled down the rocky slope, landing in a heap 20 yards away. His rifle clattered down after him. I approached cautiously, Colt trained on his chest. Young, barely 20, with a patchy attempt at a beard and wide, frightened eyes. Please, he gasped, blood soaking through his shirt. Don't kill me. Billy Collins, I said, recognizing him from the wanted poster. You're a long way from home, boy. Fear flashed across his face. How'd you know my name? I make it my business to know who I'm hunting. I knelt beside him, pressing the barrel against his shoulder wound. He screamed. Where's Stanton? Rattlesnake Canyon was a decoy, he gasped through clenched teeth. They're holed up in the old Calico silver mine, 2 days north of here. I studied his face, looking for the telltale signs of a lie. Found none. The Apache woman, she still alive? Was yesterday. Billy's eyes darted nervously. Look, mister, I never killed nobody. Just fell in with the wrong crowd. You should have thought about that before joining up with a murderer. I bound his wound with a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt, then secured his hands behind his back. He wouldn't die, but he wouldn't be following me either. The law could sort him out later, if the vultures didn't find him first. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. A flash of color against the dusty landscape. I drew my Colt again, advancing slowly toward a cluster of boulders. Come out, slowly. A woman emerged from behind the rocks, limping badly. Dark hair fell in tangled waves past her shoulders. Her deerskin dress was torn and stained with dust and blood. But it was her eyes that held my attention, deep brown and filled with a fury that even exhaustion couldn't dim. Elena, the Apache woman from the stagecoach. You're hurt, I said, holstering my weapon. Her gaze flicked to the gun on my hip, then back to my face. You are hunting them, the men who took me. Not a question. Her English was accented but clear. Yes, I will show you where they hide. She straightened, wincing as she put weight on her injured leg. I escaped 2 nights ago. They will be looking for me. I studied her carefully. You need medical attention. I need justice. The word held a weight that spoke of more than just her recent captivity. The one called Stanton. He has killed my people before. 2 summers ago, he led men to our camp. Many died. The revelation settled like a stone in my gut. Stanton's crimes ran deeper than I'd known. "Can you ride?" "Yes." She gestured to Billy, who watched us with wide eyes. "What about him?" I glanced back at the young outlaw. "He stays. Can't bring him where we're going." For a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she nodded once, understanding the hard calculus of survival out here. I helped her onto my horse, noticing how she favored her right leg. A deep gash ran along her calf, crudely bandaged with strips of cloth. "There is water 3 miles north," she said as I mounted behind her, careful to keep space between us. "And plants that will help with your friend's shoulder and my leg." I raised an eyebrow. "He's not my friend." "No." Something like approval flickered in her eyes. "He is not." We rode north, leaving Billy Collins to contemplate his choices under the merciless desert sun. Another hard lesson from a land that offered nothing but hard lessons. Elena proved to be as good as her word. By nightfall, we'd found water, a small spring hidden amongst rocks where no casual traveler would spot it. She gathered plants with practiced hands, crushing leaves and stems into a poultice she applied to her leg. "You know this land well," I observed as she worked. "My people have lived here for generations." She didn't look up. "Before yours came with guns and disease." I couldn't argue with that truth. Instead, I checked my weapons again, laying out ammunition in neat rows. The Colt had 5 rounds remaining. The Springfield carried another 10. Not much if Stanton's gang was as large as rumored. "You were a soldier," Elena said, watching my preparations. "Once, a lifetime ago. But you still move like one. Still think like one." She tied off her bandage with deft fingers. "Why do you hunt these men? For money?" I met her gaze across the small fire. "Would that matter to you?" "Yes." Her answer was immediate. "A man who fights only for gold has no heart. He will run when the fight turns against him." "I'm not running." She studied me for a long moment. "No, I do not think you will." That night, as Elena slept fitfully across the fire, I kept watch, my thoughts turning to Stanton. We'd once been brothers in arms, fighting side by side. Now we were predator and prey, locked in a dance that would end with blood. Some said vengeance was a hollow pursuit, but out here in lands where law was a distant concept, sometimes vengeance was all the justice a man could hope for. Dawn broke with the distant rumble of thunder, a summer storm gathering over the mountains. Elena and I broke camp quickly, pushing north toward the abandoned silver mine. The terrain grew more rugged, with sharp-edged rocks that could slice a horse's leg to the bone if you weren't careful. "There!" Elena pointed to a distant ridge where the mountainside had been carved away, leaving a dark wound in the earth. "The mine entrance is there." I studied it through narrowed eyes. A perfect defensive position. Anyone approaching would be exposed on the slope while defenders could fire from cover. "How many men?" I asked. 8, maybe 10. Stanton keeps 2 men watching always." I did the math quickly. Bad odds, even with surprise on our side. "We'll wait for dark," I decided. "I'll go in alone. You stay with the horse." Her expression hardened. "No, I will come. This isn't your fight. They butchered my family." Her voice remained level, but her eyes blazed. "They took me like I was property. This is more my fight than yours." I recognized the look of someone who wouldn't be swayed, and truth be told, I needed her knowledge of the terrain. "Can you use this?" I held out my buck knife. She took it, testing the balance with practiced ease. "I can use it." The plan formed in my mind. Simple, brutal, and with a dozen ways it could go wrong. But simple plans were often the ones that worked. "We'll use the storm for cover. When it hits, I'll create a diversion at the main entrance. You circle around, find another way in if you can." Elena nodded, understanding what wasn't said. We'd have one chance. If either of us failed, we'd both likely die. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, we prepared. I divided the remaining ammunition, keeping most for the Colt, but ensuring the Springfield was loaded. Elena fashioned a sling for the knife from a strip of leather, securing it to her thigh. "They took my people's land," she said quietly, "poisoned our water, hunted us like animals. Today, some of that debt is repaid." I checked the percussion caps on my revolver one final time. "Today, justice finds Jake Stanton." The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as we moved into position. Lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the mine entrance where two men huddled beneath an overhang, rifles across their knees. Thunder followed 3 seconds later, the storm almost directly overhead now. Perfect timing. I struck the match against a rock, shielding the flame with my body until it caught the fuse. The dynamite, acquired from a sympathetic prospector 2 days back, would create the diversion we needed. When the explosion came, it was like the mountain itself had split open. A fireball erupted from where I'd placed the charge, 30 yards from the mine entrance. Both guards leapt to their feet, shouting in alarm. I didn't waste the opportunity, taking aim with the Springfield. The first guard went down with a neat hole where his heart had been. The second managed half a turn before my second shot caught him in the throat. Men poured from the mine entrance, drawn by the explosion and gunfire. I counted 6, which meant at least 2 more inside, including Stanton. I fired methodically, dropping 2 more before they realized where the shots were coming from. Bullets whined past my position as I rolled to new cover. My Springfield was empty now. I drew the Colt, waiting for a clear shot. The moment came when one man broke cover, trying to flank me. My first shot took him in the chest. My second missed as another man dove behind a boulder. 3 men left outside and they had me pinned down. I checked my ammunition. 3 bullets remaining in the Colt. I'd need to make each one count. A scream from inside the mine told me Elena had found her way in. The remaining men turned at the sound, momentarily distracted. I seized the chance, rising to one knee and firing twice in rapid succession. 2 more dropped. The last man outside fired wildly in my direction before retreating into the mine. I followed, keeping to the shadows of the entrance, Colt at the ready. Inside, the mine was a maze of rotting support beams and abandoned equipment. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the smell of sulfur hung thick in the air. Somewhere ahead, I heard the sounds of struggle. I moved cautiously, aware that my final bullet needed to count. As I rounded a corner, I saw them. Elena locked in combat with one of Stanton's men, my knife flashing in the dim light. Before I could intervene, she drove the blade into his chest with savage precision. She looked up, blood splattered across her face. "Stanton," she gasped, "deeper in the mine." We advanced together, following the narrow tunnel as it descended into the earth. A lantern burned at the far end, illuminating a makeshift living space. Bedrolls, supplies, and a table covered with maps. Stanton stood with his back to us, loading a shotgun. "It's over, Jake," I called. He turned slowly, recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Hayes, should have known Morrison would send you." "Morrison didn't send me. This is personal." Stanton's eyes flickered to Elena, then back to me. "Still fighting other men's battles, I see. You always were the Army's good dog." "You betrayed us at Cold Harbor," I said, Colt aimed at his chest. 12 men died because of the information you sold. 12 men died because the war was insanity," Stanton spat, "and Morrison was going to sacrifice us all for a general's commendation." I faltered, caught off guard by the accusation. "What are you talking about?" "Ask Morrison about the orders he ignored." Stanton's laugh was bitter. "Ask him about the gold shipment he diverted." "I didn't betray our unit, Hayes. He did." Doubt crept into my mind like fog. Morrison had always been ambitious, ruthless even. Could Stanton be telling the truth? He's lying, Elena said beside me. This man has no honor. Stanton's eyes narrowed. The Apache bitch speaks English better than I expected. In that instant, he moved, shotgun rising with surprising speed. I fired my last bullet, catching him in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall, squeezing one barrel of the shotgun. The blast caught me in the side, spinning me against the mine wall. Through a haze of pain, I saw Elena launch herself at Stanton, knife slashing toward his throat. He blocked with the shotgun, the blade skittering across metal. With his good arm, he struck her across the face, sending her sprawling. The world tilted as I struggled to remain conscious. My Colt was empty. The knife was beyond reach. Stanton stood over Elena, raising the shotgun for a killing blow. With the last of my strength, I lunged forward, tackling him around the waist. We crashed into the table, maps and ammunition scattering. The shotgun discharged into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of dirt and stone. Stanton's fist connected with my wounded side, sending lightning bolts of agony through my body. I grappled blindly, fingers finding purchase on his throat. "You always were too stubborn to die, right?" he gasped, struggling beneath my weight. "And you always talk too much." I tightened my grip, watching the light fade from his eyes. But before unconsciousness claimed him, Elena appeared, my knife in her hand. "This is for my family," she said calmly, and drove the blade into his heart. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. I rolled off Stanton's body, pain radiating from the shotgun wound in my side. Elena knelt beside me, examining the injury with practiced hands. "You will live," she pronounced, tearing strips from her dress to bind the wound. "If infection does not set in." "That's comforting," I managed through gritted teeth. Outside, the storm had passed. Sunlight filtered through the mine entrance as Elena helped me to my feet. Together, we stumbled into the daylight, leaving Stanton's body to the darkness. 3 weeks later, I stood on the main street of Redemption, watching as Morrison exited the sheriff's office. The wound in my side had healed enough to let me ride, though Elena warned it would pain me in cold weather for years to come. "You're still here," Morrison said, surprise evident in his voice. "Thought you'd have collected the bounty and moved on by now." "Been thinking about what Stanton said before he died." I watched Morrison's face carefully. "About Cold Harbor, about the gold shipment." His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Stanton was a traitor and a liar." "Maybe." I stepped closer. "But I've been asking questions. Turns out there was a gold shipment that never reached headquarters, and orders that never made it to our unit." Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. "Careful, Hayes. That's dangerous talk." "Truth often is." I didn't reach for my weapon. Didn't need to. "I'm leaving town today, heading south with Elena. But those questions, they have a way of finding answers sooner or later." For a moment, I thought he might draw. Instead, his shoulders sagged slightly. "War makes men do things," he said quietly. "Things they can't take back." "Yes," I agreed. "It does." As I turned to leave, Morrison called after me. "Hayes." When I looked back, his expression had hardened. "You should know. Stanton's brother Marcus rode into town yesterday. Asked a lot of questions about you." The news settled like a cold stone in my gut. "Where is he now?" "Left this morning, headed south." Morrison's eyes held a warning. "He's not alone." I nodded once, understanding the unspoken message. The hunt wasn't over. It had merely changed direction. Elena waited for me at the edge of town, our horses packed for the journey ahead. She'd decided to return to what remained of her people, and I'd found myself volunteering to escort her. "Is it finished?" she asked as I approached. "No." I mounted up, checking that my newly acquired ammunition was secure. "Stanton's brother is looking for us, with friends." Her expression didn't change, but her hand moved to the knife at her belt, my old buck knife, which she now carried as her own. "Then we will be ready." We rode south as the sun climbed high above us, casting our shadows long across the Arizona dust. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, I wasn't riding toward emptiness. I had purpose beyond vengeance, even if that purpose now included staying alive. Some boundaries once crossed could never be returned to, but others, the boundaries of justice, of redemption, of finding purpose beyond vengeance, those were territories still worth exploring, and I wasn't riding alone anymore. 2 days later, as we made camp in a narrow canyon, Elena spotted the dust of riders on our trail. 3 men, moving fast, following our tracks with the determination of men with blood on their minds. Marcus Stanton, I said, studying the approaching dust through my field glass. And 2 of Jake's former gang members. We prepared quickly, using the skills that had kept us both alive through years of hardship. I positioned myself on a ridge with the Springfield, while Elena took cover among the rocks below, ready to move if the situation turned against us. As the riders drew closer, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The wound in my side throbbed with each heartbeat, a reminder of how close death had already come. But I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Every man dies, but not every man chooses how he lives. I levered around into the chamber and took aim. The boundary between justice and vengeance was a line drawn in desert sand, easily crossed, easily erased. But as the sun beat down and the riders approached, I knew which side of that boundary I stood on. And I wasn't standing there alone.